Morning, everyone. Welcome to Recession Rebellion Week 9. Excitingly, we only have 2 Rebellion webinars this week, which is today and Thursday. So there will be no webinar tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We're having a day off. So, yes, you can show up here at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. You might just find Martin sat here doing work and not really in the mood to have a chat about very much at all. So just note that one for the diaries. And Thursday, Martin will be on. Martin, what are you talking about on Thursday?
I've no idea yet.
He's got no idea. Again, it's that level of outstanding professionalism that for which Recession Rebellion has become known in just a short space of time. Anyway, let's crack on. A lot to cover off today. I said to you last week that we're going to spend a little bit of time examining the adaptive organisation and thinking through what an adaptive organisation is, what the attributes of it are, and how as a leader you go about building it so that it functions in the way that you want, which is to say that it is in the short term more innovative, more able to respond to what's going on in the world around you, and in the longer term more able to withstand the next wave of challenges, whatever they might be, what I like to now call COVID-20. Anyway, so we're going to get into that. I'm going to start breaking this out as the weeks go by, and start to look at, as different webinars go by, I should say, and start to look at different attributes, I think, of the adaptive organisation. So we're going to start today by talking about values. So this little session is called the value of values, which is the first key to building an adaptable business. So let's get into it. So you remember from last week, we talked about the fundamental attributes of the adaptive organisation. So those being awareness, agility, and adaptability itself. And the whole pillar of awareness really being focused on, we have a really rock solid core of self-identity, of values alignment, and of a sense about what we're actually trying to achieve in the world. So, you know, that thing of whatever's going on out there, we can be quite inner directed as well, in the sense of, you know, we understand who we are, what we stand for, and that really doesn't get shaken. It really doesn't get changed by what's going on out there in the world. Because if you haven't got that, if you haven't got that kind of rock solid core within, ultimately, the moment that anything comes along and challenges that, whether that be a big kind of political, economic, social, technological change, of which the current crisis is certainly one, or whether it's competitive threats, or whether it's actually just some bad behavior on your team, you know, or a client asking you to behave in a certain way, you know, there isn't necessarily the bedrock, the foundation, that sort of rock solid core of inner identity and durability, really, which is essential in order to be able to navigate through the world with integrity. So we're going to talk about that first pillar now. I want to talk specifically about values alignment. Although if you want to recap what I said on those pillars, last week's webinar is a good place to start. YouTube, can I just ask, if you're not on mute, can you just double check you're on mute, please? Thank you very much. So, values, a very, very much misunderstood word in business, a bit like strategy, a bit like creativity. And really, what can happen with values is we're very, very good at drinking our own Kool-Aid. A lot of the time, you know, you go into organizations and you hear values espoused that have nothing to do with the way that the organization actually behaves, which is underpinned by its values, which is to say what it truly cares about and how it wants to show up in the world. So your true values are not what is written down on some PowerPoint charter and God Save Us All, some brand book. Your values are actually really they're kind of non-negotiable in that sense. They're the received wisdom that exists in your organization about and in your own head, frankly, about, you know, what matters to you and why it matters to you. So your true values are really how you behave when no one's looking. If you want to know who you are, look at who you are when no one's looking. It will tell you a lot about that. Your values actually are about the decisions you make when the heat is on. So how do I put this? So we are seeing at the moment in the world a lot of organizations who profess to be, you know, all about their people, for example, as soon as the opportunity to save some money through furloughing comes on. We've spoken about furloughing before, so I'm not going to equivocate on that point, because those of you who attend this regularly know what I mean when I say this, that, you know, the people that are doing furloughing to preserve margin, or are simply cutting staff costs when they've got choices otherwise, well, they're showing their true values there, and their true values aren't that they care deeply about their people. If they have other options, yet the first thing that they choose to do is to get rid of people or treat them poorly in some way, shape or form. The heat can also be on in different ways, by the way. Your true values might be how you behave when success comes knocking. So, you know, success, I've found this in my own career, that I have seen people reveal who they are when they become successful, in ways that I hadn't anticipated, and frankly, not always positive ways, you know, because they don't think they need the people around them in the same way anymore, or whatever, that they simply can become quite grandiose and can actually start embracing values and behaviors which are not really wholly positive ones, but at least they're true, I suppose. That's the thing, isn't it? At the end of the day, this isn't a conversation about I have a view on what good values are and what bad values are, but actually what I'm saying here is your true values are what will really determine your behavior when the heat is on. The ways you can treat those who do nothing for you will reveal your values, for better or for worse. And ultimately, your values, though, are the things that cost you. Your values are the things that you will spend time, effort, money, heartache, blood, sweat, tears, whatever language you want to put around it. Your values are the things that you will invest because you care about them. So you'll invest against them, you'll invest into them, basically. And we'll come back onto that point a little bit later on. If a value doesn't cost you anything, is it really a value at all? It seems to me is a pretty valid question. So, you know, your true values really are there. You know, you've got a choice about whether or not you lie to yourself and lie to everybody else about them, or actually if you remain in ignorance of them, because a lot of our behavior is unconscious. But your true values are there, and they do inform how you behave. They do inform how you show up in the world. They inform what results you get all day, every day. And they happen, as I say, they behave when no one's looking and when the heat is on, and all those sorts of things as well. So let's talk about, you know, actually what that happens. Now, I've used this chart before, but I make no apologies on quickly going over it again. You know, one way in which people reveal their true values at tough times is by taking the heritage and values bypasses. So what I mean by that is the heat is on, or we've had some unwelcome news, or we think we can get away with it, is the other thing. And actually then what happens is we just start giving ourselves away. So actually we simply start going, you know, we've always said that our work is valuable, but then we'll actually immediately give it away when we're asked to do so. Or we've always said we stand for the right thing, and then you ask us not to do that. We said we're crass people until you ask us to do anything for the money and we agree to do it. Or we say that we're client partners, but then when the heat is on, we'll behave like servants in duty to our masters, you know. And when that happens, again, when people take the values bypasses, the unfortunate but stimulating truth is that really is their values. That really is, it's more revealing about who they are. Somebody who says that, you know, they're client partners, but actually they will suddenly default to master-servant behavior when asked, fundamentally is saying that they value money over other kinds of, you know, they value money over say long-term relationships, with money at all costs, you know, that they just want that kind of short-term easy road payback. They don't want challenge, they want the easy life. Another sort of way of thinking about values, perhaps. Or heritage bypass, you know, we're known for discipline mastery until you ask us to turn our hand to anything. We've always looked after our people until we kick them out. I spoke about that earlier. Or we're proud of our smart strategies, and we've always valued strategy until the heat is on, and actually we're just going to start doing stupid shit now, which again is very revealing about what somebody's actual values are. You know, under pressure, under heat, the truth will always start to come out. Underlying question, of course, is what kind of shit business do you think we're running around here? You know, it's a really good question to be asking that. You know, if you see people around you taking the values bypass and the heritage bypass, you might want to call it. You know, I think values are quite hard to change. I think we care about the things we actually care about, but I also think we have choices about who we associate with, who we work with. And when we're seeing bad behaviors or values that don't chime with our own, I think we're right to call it. And I think we're also right to understand ourselves that we don't always stay true to our own values, that our own values are things sometimes that we can let ourselves down on. You know, we care about them, but we're human beings. We can be fallible and make mistakes. I'm going to talk to you about my own values in a second, and they are values that I take very, very seriously, and I will fall down against those standards, you know. So what kind of shit business do you think we're running around here? Actually, is a good way of checking in on, you know, when I'm asked to do something I don't want to do with corporate punk, or when I'm asked to take decisions that I'm really uncomfortable with, or I'm actually out of my own, I'm not holding myself to account in the right way. And I'm not staying true to the values that I do actually genuinely care about. Is that true? You know, it's a good way of bringing myself back in line and bringing other people back in line. So I suppose what I'm saying so far is in the end, you have a set of values. You may be in denial of them, you may be in ignorance of them, but they are there and they are driving your behavior and they are driving what you see. Your true values will always reveal themselves. You can't hide it. Nature has a way of putting us in situations of testing us in ways that really show us who we are and show the people around us who we are. So your true values will always come to surface. So you better understand what they are, you know, and then you better start navigating through in that knowledge in a way that, you know, feels right to you based on how you want to show up in the world and based on your own moral compass and your own ethical compass and your own integrity. You know, at the end of the day, I'm not here to give you a lecture in morality and ethics, but what I am here to say is that people who say one thing and then their values and their behavior points in another direction, they aren't congruent and they aren't therefore going to win. They're not going to be picking up customers. They're not going to be winning the respect of their peers and their colleagues. They're not going to be building businesses that are robust, resilient, adaptive, whatever word you want to put around it, you know, because in the end, who they think they are and who they actually are simply too far apart. So there's not that, as I said right at the beginning, there's not that inviolable integrity to what they're doing. So I thought, just to give you some examples of this, I would actually share my own values with you, which I really don't mind doing, actually. I partly want to share them because it's good to put them into the open air and, you know, and tell you how I've thought about them. And I actually went through the process with a coach of mine of writing them down a few months ago. And I found it immensely valuable as an exercise to do that, partly because it crystallized something about me that I always knew to be true and felt to be true, but also because I've always found in my own life that having things written down, in the way that I have a manifesto written down for my business and have a manifesto written down for my life, having my values written down as well gives me something that I can routinely check in against and go, am I where I want to be? Am I behaving in the ways that I want to behave? Am I staying true? Am I living true? Am I working true to the values that I espouse in the world? So here they are. So I want to spend a minute or two on these because this, you know, I'm here to help you, not to give you a lecture on me, you know, but I hope this is helpful to share these. So I have 5 values. The first value is excellence, which is actually about being good at what I do and being known for being good at what I do. I'm not doing anything that's average. You know, I try and I care deeply about making sure that the work that I put out into the world is as good as it can possibly be. And I take very seriously in this line of work in coaching and consulting, you can actually do quite a lot of good, but you can also do an immense amount of harm if you give bad advice or you act in the wrong ways with people. So for me, like, not doing anything that's average, making sure that everything I do has got real integrity about it matters enormously to me. And a journey of lifelong learning. I mean, I read about a book a week, still read about a book a week, and immerse myself in the press on an almost daily basis as a way of just feeding my own mind, you know, and all that contributes to that value, which I call excellence. The second thing is creativity. So, you know, I like to imagine new things and bring them into the world, both inside work and outside work. I mean, Recession Rebellion that I did, Martin and I came up with the idea for that a few weeks ago. You know, that has been something that has been a creative exercise as much as any other. You know, the writing is a creative exercise. What I do in music is a creative exercise, and so on. And it's about solving difficult problems in original ways and not stopping exploring. You know, creativity is a journey into the unknown, and it's a journey into chaos, really, and seeing what emerges from chaos. and I care deeply about, about having that creative force, that creative energy in my life. I'm going to come on to that last one. Responsibility. So contributing to my family's future. I'm actually we have no one else. In my family, it's really just about me and my other half, and I'm all with the earning power. So taking sensible bets and being responsible really matters to me. And then care. In the end, I really care about care. Helping others solve their problems, making a meaningful contribution to society. Not breaking things or people when they just need to be better, and being kind. Those things. Kindness, I think, is hugely underrated in the world. And actually, we're doing some work with an organization in the US at the moment, which is all about kindness. And we'll be talking more about that, I'm sure, over the coming months. But it really matters to me as a value, but I stick it under care for others, care for the wider world. And then my number one driving value, the thing that actually I obsess around, and I do, people who know me most will tell you I actually genuinely obsess around this, is integrity. So, keeping my promises without fail. Integrity means keeping your promises, really. Treating others as I want to be treated, being true to myself and what I set out to achieve in the world. I've no interest in being here for anybody else's self-expression. I'm interested in hearing my own self-expression and to try and do good things and to try and help others. All of those, though, are really, really high standards. Excellence is a very, very high standard. To be creative, consistently creative, is a very, very high standard. And to act with integrity is perhaps the hardest thing of all, I think. That we have so many pressures on us, as I said earlier on, that will test our ability to act with integrity and can force us to really buckle in and buckle under pressure, and to do things that are antithetical, that betray ourselves, betray each other in the moment. All those sorts of things are really, really, can be really pressing and really present in the world, right? And without getting political, you can see a lack of integrity in our politics at the moment. You can see it in the lying, the misinformation, the disinformation, and the kind of partisan, lack of debate, and the shrill screeching over considered conversation about what needs to happen in the world. So integrity is about keeping promises, about being authentic, and about being true to what you set out to achieve. And so I share those with you because those for me are rock solid examples of what are my true values. Those are the things I actually know guide my behavior in the moment. Yours will be different, probably, or at least partially different to that. And in some cases, very, very different to that. And as I say, I'm not here to give you a value judgment on what good values and bad values are. I have a personal view on that, which you will gather as you hear me talk, almost by implicit association, as it were, or by inference, perhaps more better way of putting it. But I'm here in the end to just to tell you that these are my true values. I'm going to talk to you about how I discovered them for myself now. So whether I'm looking at this at a personal level about who am I and how am I showing up in the world, or whether I'm looking at it at a business level, there are three things that actually you can do. In order to do them, you need space for discussion and reflection. You need to make sure that you've got some clear time to think. And actually the process of when I did my values and defined them, it took time, right? It wasn't, in one sense they're easy because actually, if you know yourself at all and you've been to any sort of journey of self-discovery, they're kind of there and you know that they inform your behavior, but how you codify them, how you capture them. And also, you'll probably find you've got a very, very long list, and I like to try and get them down to 4 or 5 because those are the really important ones. And as I say, integrity being my number one. That can take you a little bit of time. And it's good to reflect, and especially if you're working on this at a business level, it's good to discuss. Curious, open, and clear-sighted. I think one of the things that values work really needs is a kind of quite objective and not lacking compassion, but quite clear-sighted view of the kind of lies that we're all quite good at telling ourselves if we're not careful in the ways that we deceive ourselves and those around us. And being curious about what they are and open to interpretation, I think is really important. And finally, perhaps controversially, no brand people. This is not a brand exercise, I mean, it is at one level, right? Your brand, whether, I don't really subscribe to the idea of personal brands, to be honest, but if you want to use that language, your personal brand or your brand as a business is really just the exhaust fumes of the things that you actually do in the world. And, you know, if it's the exhaust fumes of the things that you do in the world, well, then the things that you do and really your behavior, which are informed by your values. So the idea of our brand values as being distinct from who we are and being a separate thing to manage feels to me to be, well, let's just say not inaccurate and unhelpful. And I think it moves the discussion away from what is real and what is authentic and moves it into a marketing sphere in a way that actually runs counter to what I'm preaching here, I suppose, which is get clear on who you really are when the music stops, you know? So if you are going to say brand people, you're going to have brand people in the room. I think it's about very clear guardrails, because we're not having a conversation about managing a brand as an abstract thing, and therefore we can inject into that abstract thing whatever we want. I think it's about having an inward-looking, revelatory kind of conversation here. Okay, so when you've got that, three things. Firstly, check the exits. So interrogate why you or your business fired the last 5 people it did, or why you left your last 2 roles. Unless it was for gross misconduct, right? In which case, well, that's a matter for you. Or you fired somebody for stealing, fraud, whatever. In almost all instances, it will be because of values violations. So that is the shortcut way of getting to your values, is writing down the common themes. Why did you get rid of people? And then actually, how do you spin that into positive statements of what your values actually are? So, you know, most of the time, you know, if you fire somebody because they didn't take enough care of a specific customer, that might point you to the fact that caring for your customers really matters to you. Or you fired somebody for being insufficiently ruthless in a procurement conversation, well, that tells you something as well. Or, you know, if you fired somebody because they simply were sloppy and inaccurate in their work, that tells you something too. Not all of this is going to sit comfortably with you potentially. Sometimes the values that you and your organization have got aren't particularly comfortable to look at. But if you look at them, at least you know whether or not that's something that you want to do a little bit of development work around, or actually you're quite comfortable with, and you can start to recruit authentically in an aligned way towards. So that's checking the exits. Then count the cost. So look over your history. History is always a teacher. We're terribly good at ignoring it, actually, as human beings. So you can ask, what did we invest in and why? Or perhaps a better way of putting that question is, what did I sacrifice to get here? What did we sacrifice to get here? I can tell you for a fact that, you know, the corporate punk for me has involved, you know, a lot of sacrifice over the years. Actually, it has involved financial sacrifice. It's involved personal sacrifices around, you know, particularly around personal time. And again, I would say that those for me are sacrifices at the altar of integrity, right? As I said, I'm being the most authentic version of myself and trying to build a business that's the most authentic expression of itself. Actually, it's integrity, and you can't do that without sacrifice. Your values are the things that cost you. Don't forget that. So you've got to look at your behavior in the round. You know, if you've invested over the longer term, one of the things I've admired about Martin over the years is that sort of 4 years that he spent trying to work out how to apply mathematical psychology in a rigorous and robust way in business, and developed his quite advanced model for how he, you know, and how his business looks at the sales and marketing process. And then how does that model apply to different types of organizations? Well, again, what that tells you, that Martin is not interested in a quick buck. He's interested in doing work that genuinely adds value to his clients. And I think that tells you something about Martin's values. He'll have his own take on that, I'm sure. So again, if you count the cost, if you look at what you've actually taken steps to sacrifice, if you look at you know, what you've taken, made sacrifices to be able to do in the world, then actually, you know, that will tell you a lot about you know, who you really are. And also consider the opposite. We're in the process of a values definition here. We're not in the process of, you know, in the process of defining the lowest common denominator. So I think it's really useful sometimes to check the opposites, to go, would anybody actually claim to or would plausibly or credibly want to lay a claim to doing the opposite. Sometimes the opposites aren't what you think. So I said earlier on that, you know, that I have a value of excellence. Well, the opposite of excellence isn't actually, is mediocrity, perhaps is the way that you would put that. And you go, well, there are plenty of businesses out there that are more than happy to make other mediocre businesses into good ones, and are more than happy to pump out stuff that they think is just good enough to get the next sale. And they will recycle their own IP and everything else in order to be able to do that. It's perfectly plausible, perfectly valid way to live in the world. It's just not one that I choose to embrace myself. So sometimes, you know, sometimes the opposite of creativity, for example, I'm spitballing here, might be replicability. You know, that I'm not interested in bringing new things into the world. What I'm interested in is taking old things and recycling them and just reproducing them at scale. It's a totally different sort of value set than the one that I and we at Corporate Punk espouse, but it is an opposite. You know, the opposite of integrity doesn't mean to act with dishonesty, but it might be that actually what you really care about short-term financial goals, and those are the things. Or you're not interested in your own authentic expression, you're interested in just making the sale. You know, it's different types of thinking through opposites. Sometimes you have to think a bit deeper than just going to the thesaurus and kind of clicking on antonym and seeing what it tells you, you know. But you will find things that aren't without plausible opposites. So trustworthiness, honesty, for example. There isn't a business out there that's going to say it values dishonesty or it values not being trustworthy. So I think, you know, that's the lowest common denominator thing potentially. So I think, you know, checking the exits, counting the cost, and considering the opposites are all really useful, different ways and techniques to help you get into what your true values actually are. And you may not like them, right? You may not be that comfortable. You may not be comfortable with your organization's true values and the alignment between its values and yours, but you weren't comfortable anyway. At least you know why it is, and at least then you can start to think through what you do about that, you know. So the journey into values discovery is not always a really, you know, clean one or a polite one. So finally, the one thing you should do now, take an hour, reflect on your personal and career history and see what it has to tell you about your values. Start with your own values, sometimes a really good thing to do before you start thinking about your company's or thinking about somebody else's or a wider cohort's values, and assess that process for impact and go from there. That's it. Questions?
Phil, so two things from me. One is I actually took the time to do the professional lookup about what I'm going to be speaking about on Thursday. So task mindset and the curse of busy, and I'll be explaining whether Zoom fatigue is real, and it is, and why it's real. So that was just that part. Phil, I thought, honestly, like, I love the sessions that you do. That's definitely one of the best that we've ever done, and I think that you always do great ones, but that was just absolutely superb. And I think, as ever, the thing that I personally enjoy is that both of us are very honest about things. So we're not trying to say that we do everything perfectly just because we built models about stuff or don't understand things. So I really appreciate you sharing your values and all the feelings about it. I thought it was a terrific run through it. So we've got a couple of awesome questions. So in terms of values, there has to be a room for growth and refinement as values. They have to be in sync with socio-economic changes. In the digital world, where the borders dissipate, we need to acknowledge values of a wider audience in order to be able to connect and integrate process, ideas, etc. I believe that this individual ability to put one's values in a broader context is very desirable these days. So the question with that's the context, is do you agree? And the second question I'll add to it is that how often should one review their values? Because every human, like a business, is changing slowly over time. And it's not something we want to look at every week. But what would you say? Do you agree with the context?
Well, I agree with the premise of that question, yes and no. Do I think we can change as human beings? Absolutely. I think when we change, we probably change very slowly. If I look back at my own values, do I think that they're different to where I was when I was 20 years old? Not really. Do I think I do a better job of understanding them and living by them? Absolutely. Do I think they'd be different in 10 or 20 years' time? I don't know. You know, so for me, I would say I remain to be convinced that our values change that deeply, or indeed at all, which is not, that's only a personal view, right? And but I would say it's worth checking in on them, but checking in on them perhaps every year or two through the lens of Do they still feel the truest expression of me, and am I living to them? I struggle a little bit though with the second context of that question, the second part of that question, which was, our values change to keep pace of what's going on in society. To which I say, absolute nonsense, to be honest. It's like, you stand for what you stand for. And of course, things will change out there in the world, and what people want from each other and want from you is will potentially change as well. But at your absolute core, you've got to know who you are.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, cool. So the next one is a kind of suggestion, really. Is it would be good to do a manifesto expose on values as a session, what goes into them, good brand ones from your opinion, Phil, how to have a business / personal one. I think that people are just interested in finding out more about how you see the world, not just the model for doing it, but how you see the world. So I think that's an interesting suggestion. What do you think?
I don't know. I'm skeptical. I think that perhaps this is me just being a very skeptical morning this morning. But the danger, I think, of consistently looking at other people's values is that you can start to emulate. You can start to magpie-like pick off words or pick off elements of how other people show up in the world and then take them for yourself. And I'm not sure that is an integrous way of navigating through values. I think, though, if we're having a conversation about where do claimed values and actual values differ, I think that's a really, really interesting discussion. I think that, I think that we are seeing that even happening in the press at the moment. I think Virgin Atlantic is a fantastic example of a business that has professed one set of values over years, not least being people-centric, that's now betraying those values. When you've got a multi-billionaire like Branson who's sitting there going, you all need to take 8 weeks without pay, while he sits on his massive tax avoidance island in the middle of the Atlantic or wherever it is. Do you know what I mean? So I sort of feel like I feel as though where the disconnects occur, there's value in exploring that. But I think the journey ultimately of defining values properly, and the reason I share the model, not the examples, is because I think we have to go within and do that piece of self-examination as the first stage in the process.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so I'm conscious of time, so two quick fire questions. So what, if any, outside factors should we consider when we choose our values?
None.
Cool. And do we introduce this type of thinking earlier enough in our lives? E.g., should it be part of the national curriculum and taught at school and things like that?
Oh, I didn't ask that, right? Mwah, kiss your face. That is a beautiful question. The answer is we don't introduce it early enough. We're not teaching in the way that in schools we don't teach things like oral communication skills. We don't teach creative thinking. We don't teach collaboration. We don't teach project management. We're also not teaching more sort of spiritual stuff divorced from religion. So what I mean by that is Christianity, Islam, all the rest of it. I'm not here to have a view on that, but what I am here to have a view on is, what does it mean to live an integrous life? What does it mean to understand your values and live to them? That stuff isn't being taught in schools at the moment, and I think we create a poorer society as a result of it.
Brilliant ending to it. So absolutely wonderful session. As Phil mentioned, no session tomorrow, but join us again 8:55 on Thursday. We look forward to taking you through the task mindset, how it works in the brain, so how humans are conditioned to make themselves busier than what they need to be, and we'll be covering Zoom fatigue as well. As ever, thanks for joining us, and thanks again, Phil. That was a great session.